That was the first time for me that I'd really smoked marijuana. And I laughed and I laughed and I laughed. It was fabulous.
The Beatles' story is closely tied to the drug culture of the 1960s, from their early days using Benzidine and Preludin to experimenting with LSD during the flower power era and eventually trying harder drugs as the decade ended. Drugs played a big role in their lives and music. Here's a look at what they took and when. Hello, by the way, and welcome to my Beatles YouTube channel. If you like the Beatles, please make sure you subscribe and you check out my other videos because you're definitely gonna find them interesting. So, let's start! The Beatles' first encounter with drugs began with the stimulant Benzidine in June 1960, a pivotal moment that introduced the young band to the world of chemical enhancement. Benzidine, a form of amphetamine, was commonly found inside over-the-counter nasal inhalers at the time. The band was introduced to this unorthodox high by the beat poet Royston Ellis, whom they had backed during a poetry reading at Liverpool's Jacaranda coffee bar. George Harrison recounted how Ellis revealed the secret of the Vicks inhaler. Ellis had discovered that if you open a Vicks inhaler, you find Benzidine in it, impregnated into the cardboard divide. This cardboard strip, once chewed, released a euphoric rush that energized the users, keeping them awake and talkative throughout the night. John Lennon remembered their reaction vividly. Everybody thought, "Wow, what's this?" and talked their mouths off for a night. This first brush with Benzidine marked the beginning of the Beatles' exploration of drugs, a journey that would evolve with the changing landscape of the 1960s. While Benzidine was relatively mild compared to the substances that they would later encounter, it opened the door to a world where the pursuit of creativity and altered states of consciousness often intertwined. The Beatles' relationship with Preludin began during their early days playing in the clubs of Hamburg, where they were first introduced to it, a popular upper at the time. Tony Sheridan, a musician that they often performed with, is credited with introducing them to these pills in 1961, reportedly telling them, "Here's something to keep you awake." In the intense atmosphere of Hamburg's club scene, where they played long sets that stretched into the early hours, these pills became a necessary tool for survival. As Ringo Starr later explained, "That's the only way we could continue playing for so long." Preludin, easily available over the counter, became a staple for the Beatles and many other bands in the circuit. It kept them energized and alert through their marathon performances. And club owners didn't mind the side effects. Preludin caused dryness of the mouth, which led to more beer sales. The combination of Preludin and alcohol created a heady mix that fueled their high-energy shows and helped them endure the demanding schedule. The Beatles' use of stimulants didn't end when they left Hamburg. As their fame grew and their schedule became even more intense, they continued relying on these drugs to keep up. The touring, recording, public appearances, and interviews that defined the peak of Beatlemania were often fueled by various forms of amphetamines, including Dexys, Black Bombers, and Purple Hearts. These pills helped them cope with the relentless demands of their careers and the pressures of constant public attention. The Beatles' relationship with cannabis started off unremarkably in 1960, after their first trip to Hamburg. The band was offered marijuana by an older drummer in Liverpool, but their initial experience was underwhelming. George Harrison recalled the moment. "We smoked it in the band room in a gig in Southport. Everybody was saying this stuff isn't doing anything." Cannabis didn't make much of an impression on them at the time, remaining a minor presence in their lives as they focused on other substances like Preludin. However, as the Beatles began playing outside of Liverpool, cannabis started to appear more frequently in their circle. Bob Wooler, the DJ at the Liverpool's Cavern Club, noted that while the local drug scene was initially dominated by amphetamines, The Beatles occasionally brought back cannabis from their trips down south, helping to slowly integrate the drug into the Liverpool drug scene. One of their early encounters with cannabis took place on New Year's Day 1962, during a grueling 10-hour drive from Liverpool to London, for their ill-fated Decca audition. During the trip, a couple of shady characters tried to join them in their van to smoke cannabis. At the time, the drugs was still unfamiliar to the Beatles, reflecting its relatively low profile in mainstream British society. The turning point for the Beatles and cannabis came on the 28th of August 1964, when Bob Dylan introduced the band to the drug during a meeting at New York's Delmonico Hotel. Misunderstanding the lyrics of I Want to Hold Your Hand, I Get High, instead of I Can't Hide, Dylan assumed they were already familiar with the drug. After a brief moment of confusion, Dylan rolled a joint and passed it to John Lennon, who handed it to Ringo Starr. Not knowing the etiquette, Ringo finished the entire joint, leading Dylan to quickly roll more. The effects were immediate and profound, with Brian Epstein famously declaring, "I'm so high I'm on the ceiling." Paul McCartney, deeply moved by the experience, insisted on having their roadie Mal Evans write down their thoughts, which culminated on the mysterious note, "There are 7 levels," a phrase that would later amuse the band, but also hinted the introspective depth that cannabis would bring to their music. By the time they were filming Help in 1965, the Beatles' cannabis use had reached a new height, significantly impacting their work. John Lennon later confessed that they were smoking marijuana for breakfast. The band was often too stoned to remember their lines, forcing director Richard Lester to adopt creative filming techniques to work around their frequent bouts of laughter and forgetfulness. The Beatles referred to smoking weed as having a laugh, and in 1965 they were having a laugh more often than not. That year they recorded Rubber Soul. John Lennon later called it the Pot Album. John Lennon also said that when the Beatles went to Buckingham Palace to meet the Queen and become members of the Order of the British Empire, MBE, they all smoked a joint in the bathroom to calm their nerves. While they were on tour, the Beatles roadies Mal Evans and Neil Aspinall carefully concealed marijuana inside normal cigarettes. The drug was not as popular as it is today, and therefore they never had any trouble crossing borders. Cannabis also began influencing their songwriting, making it more introspective and mellow. Songs like Got to Get You Into My Life became an ode to weed, according to Paul McCartney, and references to getting high crept into tracks like With a Little Help from My Friends and She's a Woman. This shift in their music mirrored their growing advocacy for cannabis, which culminated in their public support for legalization in 1967. However, the band's embrace of cannabis wasn't without its challenges. On the 18th of October 1968, John Lennon and Yoko Ono were arrested for cannabis possession while staying at Ringo Starr's London flat in Montague Square. Lennon pleaded guilty to protect Yoko Ono from being deported. The following year, George and Patty Harrison faced a similar situation, leading to suspicions that the drugs had been planted by police officer Norman Pilcher. Cannabis played a significant role in the Beatles' evolution, both musically and personally, as it became a key part of their journey through the 1960s. Their experiences with the drug not only shaped their creative output, but also placed them at the forefront of the growing conversation about drug use and its place in society.
So when we met him, by that time we'd heard much more of him and knew much more about him.
It was a great honour to meet him. We had a crazy party the night we met.
That was the first time for me that I'd really smoked marijuana. And I laughed and I laughed and I laughed. It was fabulous.
I thought I got the meaning to life that night. And I went around trying to find our roadie. Mal, get a pencil and a paper. I've got it. And Mal, because we're a bit out of it, he couldn't find a pencil and paper anywhere. But eventually, in the end of the evening, he found it, and I wrote down my message for the universe, I said, now keep that in your pocket. And Mal did. Next morning, he said, "Hey, Paul," he said, "do you want to see that?" I said, "What?" He said, "That bit of paper." "Oh, yeah." And I'd written, "There are 7 levels."
The Beatles' encounter with LSD marked a pivotal moment in their lives and careers, deeply influencing their music, personalities, and public personas. Prior to 1965, the Beatles had experimented with various substances, but it was their introduction to LSD that crystallized a profound transformation. The event that triggered this shift is often referred to as the dental experience, a curious and surreal night that would leave a lasting imprint on the band. The precise date of the Beatles' first experience with LSD is unclear, but it likely occurred in March or April 1965 at the London home of their dentist John Riley. Riley, who was friendly with George Harrison, invited John and Cynthia Lennon along with George and his wife Pattie Boyd to dinner. Unbeknownst to the guests, Riley had laced the coffee with LSD, a substance that was legal and relatively unknown at the time. As the effects of the drug began to take hold, the group decided to leave Riley's flat and head to the Pickwick Club, a decision that marked the beginning of a bizarre and intense journey through London. The night unfolded in a series of vivid and often overwhelming experiences, culminating in a visit to the Adlib Club, where the Beatles' world was further warped by the drug's effects. George Harrison described the feelings as fantastic, with an overwhelming sense of love and connection to everything around him. The experience had a mixed reception among the group. While George and John were profoundly affected, finding a new level of closeness throughout their shared experience, Cynthia Lennon was horrified by the loss of control and the disturbing hallucinations. John, on the other hand, became increasingly enamored with LSD, and soon became a regular part of his life, creating a growing distance between him and Cynthia. Their second significant encounter with LSD occurred in August 1965 during a break in their US tour in Los Angeles. This time, Ringo Starr joined John and George in taking the drug. The Beatles' entourage, including the roadie Neil Aspinall, also participated in the experience, leading to a chaotic and surreal day that left a lasting impression on all involved. John Lennon later recounted how the drug profoundly shocked Paul McCartney, who remained resistant to it for some time. Paul McCartney's reluctance to embrace LSD created a growing divide between him and the rest of the group. While John and George became increasingly immersed in the psychedelic experience, Paul remained more cautious, eventually trying the drug only at the end of 1965. Paul's resistance, however, did not prevent LSD from influencing his songwriting, and its effects began to seep into the Beatles' music in subtle and overt ways. LSD's impact on the Beatles' music was profound. The drug opened new creative avenues for the band, leading to some of their most innovative and experimental work. The song Tomorrow Never Knows, recorded for the Revolver album, was one of the first tracks to directly channel the psychedelic experience. Its lyrics, inspired by the book The Psychedelic Experience, marked a departure from the Beatles' earlier work and signaled the beginning of a new era in music. While John Lennon maintained that songs like Losing the Sky with Diamonds were not directly inspired by LSD, the association between the band and the drug was undeniable. The abstract and often surreal quality of their later work reflected the influence of acid, even if the references were not always explicit. For John and George, LSD became a gateway to deeper philosophical exploration, significantly altering their perspectives and creative processes. In contrast, Paul McCartney's relationship with LSD remained ambivalent. While he acknowledged its impact on his creativity, he was less enthusiastic about the drug's long-lasting effects, which he found exhausting and unsettling. Despite this, the peer pressure within the band and the broader cultural milieu eventually led him to experiment with the drug, although his experiences were often tinged with a sense of unease. The Beatles' exploration of LSD marked a turning point in their careers, leading them into new, uncharted musical territory. The drug's influence permeated their work, driving the creation of some of their most iconic and enduring songs. However, the personal and emotional toll it took on the band members, particularly on John and Cynthia Lennon's relationship, was significant, foreshadowing the tensions and eventual fractures that would later emerge within the group. Hi, sorry to interrupt the video. Just a very quick, very important announcement. I published a book. That's right, I published a book. It's called From the Cavern to Abbey Road, a journey through the Beatles' iconic landmarks. In this book, we see the story of the Beatles from the places where everything happened. Some of them are famous, like let's say Abbey Road Studios, and some of them perhaps not so famous, like for example the art gallery where John and Yoko met. I put a lot of work and effort into this book, and it would help me so much if you grabbed a copy. It's available on Amazon all around the world, so if you want your copy, please go to the link in the description. Thank you. Now back to the video. The Beatles' relationship with cocaine is a lesser known but significant aspect of their broader encounters with drugs. Though not as central to their image as their experimentation with marijuana or LSD, cocaine did make its way into their lives at various points during the 1960s. One of the earliest potential encounters with cocaine dates back to the 8th of December 1961, when the Beatles performed at the Cavern Club in Liverpool. On this occasion, they backed rock and roll singer David Jones, who had brought cocaine to the gig. At the time, cocaine was not widely used in England, and was a rarity in the Liverpool scene. Cavern Club DJ Bob Wooler unwittingly tried cocaine for the first time, and although his experience was not a pleasant one, he suspected that the drug taking didn't end with him that night. The Beatles, always keen to take part of whatever was happening, likely experimented as well. Paul McCartney was the first Beatle to use cocaine regularly, introduced to the drug by the London art dealer Robert Fraser, during the recording of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. For McCartney, cocaine use was part of the creative process, though he balanced it with marijuana to mitigate the come-downs. However, he quickly grew disillusioned with the drug, finding its effects underwhelming compared to the efforts required to sustain the high. His regular use of cocaine lasted only about a year, ending around 1968, when he recognized the negative impact it had on his mood and physical well-being. While McCartney stopped using cocaine relatively early, the other Beatles, particularly John Lennon and Ringo Starr, continued to use the drug into the 1970s, after the band had split. Lennon, reflecting on his experience with cocaine, dismissed it as a dumb drug, criticizing its addictive nature and the obsessive focus it fostered on securing the next dose. His disillusionment mirrored McCartney's, highlighting the fleeting appeal of the drug despite the initial allure. Cocaine's role in the Beatles' story is often overshadowed by their more publicized experimentation with other substances, but it was nonetheless a part of their journey, reflecting both the highs and the lows of their exploration of altered states.
Let's not cause any trouble, pull any strokes, or do anything I'm going to be sorry for, especially tomorrow in that television theatre, because... Are you listening to me, Lennon?
The Beatles' experience with heroin was a dark chapter in their history, one that primarily revolved around John Lennon, though Paul McCartney also had some brushes with the drug. The band's first exposure to heroin likely occurred in 1965 during the filming of Help in the Bahamas. According to director Richard Lesta, Paul McCartney was approached by two women who attempted to coax him into trying heroin. McCartney, however, rebuffed their advances, much to Lester's relief. Despite his initial avoidance, McCartney did eventually try heroin, albeit unknowingly at first. In a 2004 interview, he recalled being handed something to smoke, only to later discover it was heroin. Fortunately, it had little effect on him, and he didn't pursue it further. In contrast, McCartney's authorized biography suggests he knowingly snorted heroin with art dealer Robert Fraser and a few others, including members of the Rolling Stones, However, his caution and fear of addiction kept him from becoming deeply involved. John Lennon's relationship with heroin was far more consuming. By mid-1968, he was regularly using the drug, a habit that continued throughout the difficult sessions for Let It Be. Lennon later admitted that his addiction stemmed from the immense emotional pain he and Yoko felt due to the treatment they received from the Beatles' inner circle. According to him, the isolation and hostility they experienced pushed them towards heroin as a means of escape. Lennon's heroin use significantly influenced his music during this period. His songs Happiness is a Warm Gun and Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except Me and My Monkey, both from the Beatles' White Album, contained references to his addiction. The lyrics conveyed the struggles and heights of heroin use, making a stark departure from the more subtle drug references in earlier Beatles songs. Heroin took a toll on Lennon's creativity and involvement with the band. During the recording of Let It Be, his heroin addiction led to a noticeable withdrawal from the group's dynamics. He later admitted to being addicted at the time of the Plastic Ono Band's performance at the Toronto Rock and Roll Revival Festival in September 1969, a show where he struggled to perform due to the effects of the drug. The couple's struggle with heroin also had tragic consequences, as it has been suggested that Yoko Ono's miscarriage in October 1969 was partly due to heroin withdrawal. Yoko Ono later noted that their addiction was never as severe as it could have been, thanks to the fear of needles and the low purity of the heroin they were using. Lennon's song Cold Turkey, released in October 1969 by the Plastic Ono Band, detailed his experiences with heroin withdrawal. The track, which had been rejected by McCartney as a potential Beatles single, featured a raw and visceral account of the agony of kicking the habit. It served as a stark reminder of the dangerous path Lennon had briefly walked and his determination to overcome it. So this is pretty much it for now. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. You can also follow me on Instagram or Facebook. There is a PayPal link for donations. Of course, every donation will be absolutely appreciated. You can also buy my book. Actually, that would make me very happy indeed. The Amazon link is in the description. Or the free option is just to subscribe to this YouTube channel and maybe click the bell icon so you're the first to know when I upload new videos. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye.
Well, I'm afraid that's us run out of time.
Oh,
I'm really sorry.
Well,
So,
thanks.
Bye, everyone.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I give my heart to you, I must be sure from the very start that you